Thank y'all so much. It's great to be back in Crittenden County. I was counting up as we were driving in today how many times we've been in Crittenden County over the last several months since January of 2011, and we've had 13 official visits that we could count off the top of our head. But there's been several unofficial visits where we stopped in at the Shake Shack or whatever just to visit with folks. So we like to get down here as often as we can. And a lot of great things going on here in Crittenden County, not the least of which is we'll hear from Dr. Finner here in just a little bit. But I want to give you a little bit of an update on what's going on in Washington. I know there are probably at least a handful of you that are concerned about the Farm Bill. And so I'll get into that in just a minute. But real quick, I want to tell you about one thing, at least in Washington, that's going right. And that's an opportunity to work together on an issue that many of you already know about that came to our attention quite some time ago, but really started to ramp up about June of last year. And that had to do with your on-farm fuel storage. And as you know, the EPA was prepared to implement a rule that would go into effect in November 1st, in fact, that would require anyone who stored fuel on their farm in excess of 1,320 gallons to build a spill prevention and containment countermeasure, an SPCC structure. And that would cost you, starting at about $10,000 and going up, depending on how much storage you have on your farm. We started to hear folks in June and July were calling us and sending us letters that their distributors would not deliver to their farm because they didn't have those structures in place. Well, the EPA didn't have the authority to tell the retailers that they couldn't deliver, but they were anticipating this, and there was probably a little bit of scare tactics involved in that. And so as we started to get these letters, I wrote a letter to the EPA Administrator, Lisa Jackson, asking her to reconsider and reevaluate those priorities and sort of base them on what we believe is a more real-world standard. I wrote that letter in July. There were over 100 members, bipartisan members, that signed that letter, and we never heard back from her. So that shouldn't come as any surprise. And the EPA and the history of their relationship with farmers, probably not surprised that we didn't hear anything back. But in the intervening months, we were able to craft a bill that reflected those standards that we asked her to consider. And basically, those standards were drawn from EPA standards back in 2006 by their own definition of what a farm family is and what that level ought to be. And the underlying bill, of course, being, or the underlying law being the 1973 Clean Water Act. But in 2006, the standard that they adopted at that point in time that defined a small family was 10,000 gallons. So 10,000 gallons is their definition, and so we started that as a benchmark. Now that's a great big leap from 1,320 gallons. And so our bill essentially said you don't have to build that structure until you reach that 10,000 gallon threshold. Once you reach that threshold, you would be required to build a structure. But between 10,000 and 42,000 gallons, you build a structure but you self-certify. And then above 42,000 gallons, then you would have to contract a third-party PE and go through the certification process. Now, the University of Arkansas Cooperative Extension Service studied our bill, and they determined that our bill saves Arkansas farmers alone $240 million. Over the country, it saves American farmers $3.36 billion. Now, I don't know about you, but from where I sit, I think you can do a better job with that $3.36 million than Washington can, and our economy needs that money to generate more economic activity and not cash flow regulatory costs and compliance. And so we set about to drop this bill. We did. We got a lot of bipartisan support. And I'm on the Ag Committee, but I'm also on the Transportation Committee. And although this is an ag issue, it came up through the Transportation Committee. It falls under the jurisdiction of Waterways Subcommittee. And so we brought it to the Transportation Committee and marked up that bill, and there was not a single vote in opposition to that bill, because we had such good bipartisan support from the chairman, the ranking member, and a broad base of supporters across both sides. So we passed that out of committee and sent it to the floor, and within a matter of days we were able to bring it to the floor under suspension of the rules, which basically means both sides have agreed in principle to this bill. So I control one side of the debate, and the other side controls the opposition side of the debate, and the guy controlling time in opposition was a co-sponsor of the bill. And that's how good the bill was. There was no opposition. In fact, what we really did was stood there on the House floor and patted each other on the back for having a great bill and a bipartisan bill, and it passed off the floor without a single opposition vote by voice. It's on its way to the Senate. I've been told by both our senators that they will do everything they can to shepherd that through the Senate and make sure that it gets done so that we can provide you with $240 million worth of relief at a time when you can really use it. That's one of the success stories. So I point to that because I'm trying to soften you up a little bit. The Farm Bill didn't quite go down as easy. In fact, we're still wrangling with the Farm Bill. Let me start by talking about the Senate version. The Senate version of the Farm Bill, probably everybody in this room would agree, missed the mark. And it missed the mark because it adopted more of a one-size-fits-all approach that was sort of geared and based on a Midwestern type of a model. And it really didn't take into account the diversity of production, and certainly that is reflected in the Mid-South. And so the good news is neither of our senators voted for it. The bad news is it passed anyway. But while that passed, we were working on a bill in the House. Now, we took a little bit longer to do ours because we went out and we did Farm Bill field hearings. In fact, one of those Farm Bill field hearings was held here in Arkansas, at Arkansas State University, one of 4. And so it was sort of a super regional dynamic. It was all about the South. Now, I did everything I could to convince the chairman, Frank Lucas, that we needed to have 10 Arkansas producers on that panel of witnesses. In the end, I was able to get 5 Arkansas producers out of the 10. And they did a fantastic job. And what they did was articulate the position of Mid-South producers so well that it was reflected in the chairman's mark when we brought that bill to committee. And we continue to hear from Chairman Frank Lucas, from committee staff and others who were there, that the Arkansas field hearing was by far the best of the 4 in the country. So it had an awful lot to do in making a huge difference in the difference between the Senate version and the House version. And I think that the Arkansas producers that made their case really had everything to do with the chairman's mark that we started from and delivered a good bipartisan bill, 35-11. And in this climate, the way Washington works today, 35-11 is a good bipartisan number. So we left there thinking, wow, we've really got a shot at this, because if we had been all one-sided in either direction, I don't think we'd have had any chance at all, because that's really not what agriculture is all about. We're talking about, trying to adopt a more bipartisan approach on a policy standpoint, and that's been historically the case with agriculture. So we came out of that committee hearing feeling pretty good about it. And then we found out a few days later that leadership on both sides had no interest in talking about a farm bill. And so that's discouraging, but the reasons shouldn't really surprise you. One side says we're not spending enough. The other side says we're spending too much. And quite frankly, I think on that 35-11 vote, we really found the sweet spot and did a good job in reflecting the needs of farmers across the country and not adopting that one-size-fits-all approach that certainly our farmers in the Mid-South were afraid of, that might be the case. And so we're working on trying to prevail upon leadership. I've already signed one bipartisan letter requesting them to reconsider, but there are 2 things in our favor in advancing the farm bill. And I don't like to look at the drought as a positive thing. It's certainly affecting 2/3 of the country right now. But if you can look at the silver lining, what I think it will do is have an impact on softening people's position that we're anti-farm bill. If they're going home like I have and spending the time that I have spent talking to farmers throughout the last several weeks during the August break, I have no doubt that their opinions will change about a farm bill. And so I hope that's the case. If that's not the case, there is a procedural maneuver that we can use to bring the bill to the floor. It's called a discharge petition. And what that means simply is that if we get 218 signatures requesting that this farm bill come to the floor, then it comes to the floor, whether leadership likes it or not. Now, there are those that question, well, now, is that really going to make leadership mad? Are you worried about alienating leadership? And my answer to that is no. It's part of the rules. It's there for a reason. And I can tell you from the speaker's perspective, he may not be crazy about a farm bill, but what he is crazy about is the House working its will and respecting the rules of the House. And he is going to be as strong an advocate for the rules of the House as anybody you'll ever meet. And so if we come to him with a petition that has 218 signatures on it, that farm bill is going to come to the floor. And so I say that to say this. It's a tough hill to climb. We've got limited time, clock's ticking, September 30th is the date, as you know. But I'm going to say the glass is half full. If we're not successful, the option is to extend the current law. I would like to push this farm bill through for a couple of reasons. One is that I think it's a good bill. It's a better bill than we could possibly get, I think, from another Congress. We push this into the 113th Congress. We don't know what it's going to look like. We know what this one looks like. It's a good bill. The other thing is it could really mess up the baseline from a funding standpoint. So we have to be careful. And I know that there are some folks that say, well, you know, a 1-year extension might be a good way to look at it because we'll get the direct payment for another year. They're not going to leave the direct payment alone on a 1-year extension. They're going to continue to cut that. So if they extend the current law for 1 year, there will be amendments introduced in that extension to scale back the direct payment, number one. Number two, I'm afraid we may mess up the baseline. The third scenario, we have to have at least a short-term extension, even if we do pass the farm bill, to allow for implementation of the bill, because we're down to the last several days. So if we do get it passed before September 30th and the president signs it, it would still require a short-term extension just to get the bill implemented. That wouldn't mess up the baseline. That would be the more favorable approach to go, because we don't know what is likely to happen going into 2013 with a new Congress. There's likely to be some changes in the dynamics of both chambers and possibly the White House. We don't know. So I would take this farm bill and say it's not perfect, but it did a good job in addressing the overall needs of the country and takes us in the direction I think we need to go as a country with respect to farm policy. So all in all, let's try to think positive. We're going to continue to work hard. I am strongly advocating in every way possible trying to move this farm bill. And we hope to deliver some results to you as quickly as possible. But we've been about dealing with farmers for almost every day of this break in some form or fashion. And I enjoy it. I'm passionate about it. And I thoroughly enjoy serving on the Ag Committee. And I want to continue doing that. And I appreciate y'all and all the input that we've gotten from the 1st District of Arkansas. It made all the difference in the world between a bad farm bill in the House and a good farm bill in the House. Thank y'all very much.